Hi guys, welcome back to Econ Time with SK. So grab your notebooks, your favorite cup of coffee, and let's get started. So in this video, we are going to continue with our discussion of price elasticity of supply. Specifically, we are going to look at what are the determinants of the price elasticity of supply. And in this case, there's only one determinant, which, which is time. Whenever we think about time, it is about comparing the short run to the long run. And the short run is always where you cannot make adjustments, and the long run is always where you can change the factors of production. You have the time to respond, so you can make changes. So that's exactly what's being written here. So short run, the producers cannot respond much. So you can't, just because some market conditions have changed, they cannot go around hiring new labor or getting hold of new land or capital, because all of these things take time. So what happens is that supply is actually inelastic in the short run. So what do we mean by that? In the short run, if you were to draw out the supply curve, you are going to get a supply curve that is very steep. All right. On the other hand, when we are dealing with the long run, then producers can actually respond to the change in price, right? So then they have the time to, if they decide that they're going to increase production, now they can actually go about hiring new labor, renegotiating contracts, buying new land or capital, etc. So what we're seeing is that in the long run, from the producer point of view, they can increase the production. So supply is elastic. Again, there's actually a typo here. This should be long run. So now let's look at an application, the implication of whether you are dealing with elastic supply or inelastic supply. Here we're going to take an example about the housing market, okay? So let's take the case of the housing market in two different cities, okay? Let it be Dhaka and Khulna. And let's say that the housing supply is actually more elastic in Khulna than in Dhaka. And that makes sense, right? Because you've seen how they're basically Dhaka is very densely populated. This is where the jobs are. So most people are migrating to Dhaka, right? So you can see that it is very hard to get new land to make flats. And that's why Dhaka is actually expanding outwards, right? Because before Uttara was considered um, outside of Dhaka, right? But then, Uttara is very much a part of Dhaka now. And now we are expanding into places like Purvachal, which was just farmland before. So Dhaka is basically running out of space, right?
What that means is that when the price of flats increases, even though producers want to make more houses, they cannot do so because they cannot find the land, which means that they are not so responsive to an increase in price. On the other hand, when we are talking about Khulna, the population pressure isn't so high there. Not everybody is migrating there, which means that there's actually more space available. So in that case, if builders want to go and make new flats, right, so there's an increase in price, and let's say builders want to respond to this, it's actually quite easy for them to find new land and start making flats there. So in Khulna, because producers can actually respond to this increase in price, we can say that the supply is elastic.
So this is what we represent in this diagram here. So what we're showing is that when you're talking about Khulna, you're dealing with a very flat supply curve. Whereas when we are talking about Dhaka, we're dealing with a very steep supply curve, right? Basically, this is in elastic supply, and this one is elastic supply. So let's say that in both places, maybe people's income on an average has gone up. So the demand curve shifts outwards, right? From D1 to D2. Now, when the demand curve shifts outwards, notice that originally this was the equilibrium, right? This equilibrium was at A. Now, when the demand curve shifts outwards, for Khulna, the price increase is not so much, right? Only this much. Whereas for Dhaka, where they're just supplies inelastic for flats, you can see that the price increase is much more. So the key implication from here is that when you're dealing with more elastic supply, the price increase is much lower than if you were dealing with inelastic supply. Okay. And of course, the reason for that is that when you have more elastic supply, producers can easily increase the production of flats, and so price doesn't have to increase that much. Okay, so the bottom line is that the lower the elasticity of supply, basically the more inelastic the supply curve is, the greater is the increase in price. So with that, we end our discussion of price elasticity of supply.
Alright guys, I shall see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.